People around the world are getting itchy feet after being stuck at home for months on end. Here to share more on pre-travel COVID testing is Dr. Robert Oliverio of Roper St. Francis Healthcare. Thank you so much for joining us. And I know in order to get on a plane to travel to another country, there are some very strict guidelines. Maybe you can shed a little bit of light on how things are looking these days.
Yeah, I mean, foreign travel is going to be restricted. A lot of times you'll need to have a negative PCR test documented within a specific time frame. At this point, what we would say is, if you can avoid travel, avoid travel. I mean, particularly in places where mass transit occurs. So train stations, plane, airports, things like that. I mean, if you're going to travel, try to keep the travel down to a minimum number of people in a vehicle, and try to avoid mass transit. I mean, we understand that people are going to travel, and so the first thing to do is back to the old "is this trip necessary" kind of concept. If you don't have to go, don't go. If you're going to travel, then you really should know that you're not going to spread anything beyond your goodwill and your holiday cheese.
Absolutely, because you can do it from afar. You can send gifts through the mail. You can go on Zoom and talk to your family that way. So there are ways in which we weren't able to do 20 years ago that we're able to do today. So take advantage of it. But if you absolutely must, what are some of the things that you should take into consideration in order to keep yourself healthy and the people who are around you safe as well?
First thing is basically mode of transport. So how are you going to get to where you're going? Personal vehicle is probably the safest. Short distances, probably the safest. Anytime you get out of the car, touch a gas pump handle, go into a convenience store, increases the risk of transmission. The second thing is, who's going to be there when you get there, and what's their status? If you know your status but have no idea what the status is, the COVID status for the other guests, it's maybe not so helpful. I mean, all you can say is, well, I didn't cause the hotspot.
Right.
Yeah, that's the second thing, and then the third thing is, understand where you're going to and what you may be bringing back. We're really lucky right now in the Low Country. We have a relatively low rate in this part of South Carolina, unlike other parts of South Carolina that have a much higher rate of COVID, but we're relatively low.
Yeah.
So my big concern is, people are going to travel. They're going to, spread the virus to where they go to and bring virus back. So if you're going to a hot spot, I mean, think twice. Please think twice.
Because also if you live with someone who is elderly or have pre-existing conditions, then you ultimately could be making them deathly sick. It's so important. It's so not worth the immediate gratification of going on that trip if you're going to have to live with the consequences, which could last the rest of your life. And also to check each state's cases in the last 7 days. So every state, every single week, they put out the stats. So you want to be up on your information.
Right.
Is there any additional protection, though, that let's just say you absolutely have to? Is there any additional protection that you advise people to either wear or things that they should do to make themselves safe?
It's the normal personal hygiene, protective equipment sort of things that we've been talking about forever. So it's mask on, basically social distancing, avoid gatherings indoors. Particularly if you're in close quarters. Social distancing means 6 feet away and greater at this point if you're going to spend any particular time. So it makes the gathering really logistically difficult. Hand washing, surface cleaning, those sorts of things are really, really important. But you have to do it, particularly if you're going to be in a new place.
And I want to talk a little bit more about the ventilation, but we do need to take a break. So when we come back after the commercial, let's talk a little bit more about those gatherings and also how some states are barring them completely. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Welcome back. We've been chatting with Dr. Robert Oliverio of Roper St. Francis Healthcare. We've been talking about COVID and the holidays because a lot of people, they want to go see their family during the holidays. But doctor, you do not advise it. If you have to, though, there are certain measures that you should be taking into consideration. But if you do plan on having people come to your home, I mean, some states are banning it completely. They say absolutely no indoor events of 10 people or more, or just none whatsoever. You say outside events are a little bit safer, but ventilation is something that's really important. Just if you're staying domestic, if you're staying at home, how can you talk a little bit about the science behind that and why, if you're in a well-ventilated area, why that makes you a little bit safer when it comes to COVID?
Yeah, well, I mean, and again, we've learned a lot over time. So we used to think that COVID was transmitted by respiratory droplets, and respiratory droplets usually travel no more than 6 feet and then drop to the ground. Now we know that this can be aerosolized, and there are certain things that can aerosolize a virus, and so that aerosol can travel further, last longer in the air. So if you don't have adequate ventilation, basically you're in a COVID box. Somebody has COVID and you're with them. So opening windows is important. If you're in an area where it's too cold to open windows, that increases the risk. And really, if you're indoors any particularly long period of time, it increases the risk. So ventilation is really important. I mean, it's probably more important than surface spray.
Interesting. And do fans help? I know a lot of people living in the low country, just to keep the air circulating during the summer, use fans. Do those help?
Not really. I mean, basically what you're talking about is air exchange. So air coming in from the outside and going out from the inside.
I understand.
That's really the important thing.
I see. Okay. Pre-travel COVID testing. How soon should people get their testing before they hop on a plane or into a car or on a train to get to their destination?
So yeah, it's a logistics sort of thing right now. So testing turnaround time is about 2 days, maybe up to 3 days. So you want to give yourself plenty of time to know what your status is before you leave. So we're recommending getting tested 3 to 5 days prior to travel. That gives us time to get the test back around, and you can make a decision based on the results, whether travel is advisable.
And of course, getting the test is one thing 5 days before you travel, but after you get the test, after you walk away from the testing center, you cannot have contact with anybody or anything that may pose a risk of catching COVID.
Well, again, we're not talking about quarantine because people aren't going to be, staying home to go away for a trip. So it's really being super vigilant about, hand washing, mask wearing, avoiding, contact with large groups of people indoors. Those things are super important at that point because yes, your status can change, after you get your COVID test, and let's say you're negative. And then you go to, a barber shop, get a haircut, and the guy has COVID. I mean, done.
Exactly. Okay. You also have several testing locations. When you're talking about testing, there is such a thing as regular testing and then rapid testing. Is that something that Roper St. Francis does as the rapid version?
Well, we're going to be using the regular testing for this. That's why it's got a 2 to 3 day turnaround time. Rapid testing, we really sort of we reserve that for folks who need to have a determination as to whether or not they need to have medication right away. So we kind of hold that in reserve for patients who are sick. For those who are not sick, we think that doing the send-away testing is adequate to get the information that you need to know prior to travel. So that's the way we care.
And you have 4 different locations, one on James Island, Latson, Somerville, and North Charleston. One last question for you, Doctor. How does Roper St. Francis testing work?
Well, we want to make it as easy and convenient to folks as possible. So the express cares are the obvious solution. They're open from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. And basically what we do, you will be seen by a clinician, and that clinician will order the test and will be following up on the testing results. So that's how we sort of get the testing started and then get the results back to the patient.
I see.
And then really it's a matter of, talking to the clinician based on the testing results. I mean, the way you use this is, first of all, if you're sick, you go nowhere. Don't even think about it. Even if your test is negative, do not leave if you're sick. Second, what we're trying to do is decrease asymptomatic spread. So, those people who don't know they're COVID positive and going to another place to cause trouble, or getting together and causing trouble with, family members who are frail, elderly,
Yes.
conditions. So we're really trying to figure out who are those people. And if you're asymptomatic, you're positive test, you don't go. And that's the way to use the test.
Dr. Robert Oliverio, I want to thank you so much for joining us. Great information.
Thank you.
Thank you. We're back after this.